So in our last episode, we looked at working with multiple expressions through the use of and along with or. In this episode, we're going to continue to work with expressions, but we're going to start seeing different results on screen depending on if the expressions are true or if they're false. If you remember, we recently got a new job at a comic book store and used combinations of expressions to help our boss figure out which comics to add to his blowout sale. However, we really didn't do anything with the information in our spreadsheet other than return the Boolean result. Today, we aren't working at the comic book store, but a new Marvel movie did just come out, so we are going to take a trip to the movies. So nowadays, when you go to a lot of the movie theaters, you actually select your seat prior, instead of scrambling to the theater and hoping to find two seats together. Which definitely makes the process more efficient, and as data dorks, we love the optimization of business resources. However, there is still a problem that remains and prevents the theater from truly being fully utilized. And that is, the first row stinks, and typically people don't like sitting there. We are a little later getting our tickets, and as you can see, there are already some characters in the theater, so we are only going if we can find a decent seat. We want to determine programmatically whether a seat is good, average, or bad. As you can see on the left, we have all the purchase tickets in both the row and side of the theater that corresponds with the movie ticket. I have color-coded and defined our criteria that will help us determine the quality of seat that each character is in. A bad seat is any seat in the front row, while a good seat is any seat in the center and that is in between rows 3 and 8. An average seat is then just everything else. We tackled a similar problem in our last video, so this should be a little easier for us. First, we're going to determine who are in bad seats. The only criteria we defined as a bad seat is if the character's row is equal to 1, so this should be pretty easy again. Now let's define what a good seat is. We know a good seat is any one that is in the center and in rows 4 to 7. We will use our greater than or equal to and our less than or equal to operators to capture this range. Since we have multiple operators that will all need to be true, we are going to use our AND function that we covered in the last lesson. Now that we have all the good seats and bad seats filled with true and false values, we are actually able to determine the average seats without explicitly typing out each of the criteria. Because we know if the other two ticket types are false, that means an average seat is everything else. Or more to the point, if both bad seat and good seat are false, that means it has to be an average seat. Now, as you can see, the average seats are now also denoted for us. We have now determined the type of ticket since only a single true value exists for each character in our table. However, programs don't really work like this, and honestly, you don't want them to. You don't just want a reference table of true and false values that don't really do much. You usually want a modified output or something that triggers an action when a result is true or false. In comes what we call a control statement, because it controls the flow of our application. The first control statement we will be introduced to is the if statement. If statements are the key building block for having different things happen depending on which conditions are met. The logic of an if statement is as follows. If some condition is met, do this, else, if another condition is met, do something else, and if neither condition are met, do a completely different thing. I think the flow of the if statement is much easier to see in Python than Excel, so let's start out there. We created a couple of variables, one to store our side of the theater and another to store the row. Now we're going to type if followed by our comparison expression for what a bad seat is, which is any seat in the first row. Print here is just a function in Python that prints the words we specified. Now if the row is equal to 1, bad seat will print out. The if statement is looking for the indentation to tell it what you want to do if the condition results to true. Next, we want to tell our program what an average seat is, so we are going to then add elif, which stands for else if, followed by additional expressions of a seat side being equal to center and the row being greater than or equal to 4 and less than or equal to 7. Lastly, we have our average seats, which are represented by our catch all, which is our else statement. This just means if none of the above conditions resulted in true, this final condition will always be true. As you can see, the else statement isn't even followed by a condition since it is meant to be that catch everything else part of our expression. Now we have built our movie seat quality checker in Python. If we change the row or side variable, we have Python telling us if it is good, bad, or average. That wasn't too bad. Let's now do this real quick in Excel. This same pattern exists in Excel, but as we saw with and or, Excel uses functions for these interactions instead. So the first argument we pass, as we can see for the if function, is a logical expression that will result in true or false. Then a comma to show that you want to move on to the next part of the if statement, which in Excel is what you want to happen if the prior logic is true. Where Excel differs from Python is there is no such thing as a else if statement. So the last part of the function is our catch-all else statement. Now we have determined whether we can go to a specific showtime or not since we just want to avoid sitting in the front row. However, we haven't duplicated our Python program. How data dorks and other Excel enthusiasts approach a problem with more than two scenarios is in the else part of the function to just do another if function. This in turn allows you to do an else if statement. If those logical conditions are met, the if true output will execute, and then the else inside that function will work the same way, and ultimately serve as our catch-all. And now we have duplicated our movie seat quality checker in Excel. So if we copy paste this in our seat quality column, voila! We have determined all the types of seats currently occupied, and knowing the size of the theater, we could determine how many good, bad, or average seats are left for a specific showtime. In this episode, we learned how to add some logic to our program so that we can specify different criteria, and depending on if those criteria are true, have different things happen in our program. In our next episode of Data Dorks, we're going to work with words and build our own file extension checker.